Who have been the best 10 AFL coaches in the last decade? That's right, for the last 10 years, I have the question for you. And I've got my list here of the best 10 coaches from the last 10 years. How we're going to judge this: success, accolades, what they had to deal with that particular team, impact on the club both on and off field, things like tactical decisions, generally how they were as a coach. Starting off at number 10, I've gone with Scott. Now, which Scott? I've gone with Brad Scott. Brad Scott was coaching North from 2013 and to 2019. And then this year he coached Essendon. All up, that's around 8 years of coaching in the last decade, which is a lot of body of work. What he did with North Melbourne, I say it all the time, but Brad Scott for North Melbourne was immense. Lack of resources, lack of funding, higher ups were awful. What he had to deal with at North, and the fact he got them to prelims, he got them to high ladder positions was phenomenal, with the list that for me never ever deserved to get near the grand final. I thought being just under-resourced was so impressive, the job he did at North. North Melbourne, the dumbest fucking idiots to get rid of him in 2019. The stupidest decision. We saw what happened with, Shaw, Noble, all the failures in coaching after. He held that club afloat. Could have put him higher. Even this year with Essendon, he had done a phenomenal job in getting a pretty poor and inexperienced list to nearly making finals. Really rate him as a coach tactically as well. I think he's brilliant. But all in all, I think there are coaches with more success and body of work which deserve to be higher. Now, in 9th place, I've gone with Lyon Cameron. Lyon Cameron started coaching in 2013, and I believe he got the sack around sort of 2021. Look, that's a massive body of work. Also around 8 years of coaching, so similar to Brad Scott. The reason I have him slightly higher is he got GWS to their first ever final series. He built that GWS list from the ground up. You may think, look, it's an easy thing when you have all the draft picks, all this help from the AFL, but it is a hard thing to do. We've seen with Gold Coast, they haven't figured it out. Losing great players year after year because of the lure of bigger clubs in Victoria. Having to deal with that is also a really hard thing, but he made prelim after prelim after prelim. 16, they probably should have made the grand final, but they only made prelims. 17, making prelims. 18, I think they fell short, maybe not even prelims, but obviously in 2019, they make the grand final from, I believe, outside the top 4. Look, that grand final obviously ended up with these boys winning by a substantial amount, but he did fantastically well. Unfortunate not to win a flag, because that period of 2016 to 2019, 4 years, 4 seasons, they were brilliant. I feel like the fact that he made that list so good, it's more the list he created rather than the work he did, but having to start from absolute scratch and build it up, that for me is why he deserves 9. In 8th place, I found my first flag winning coach, Luke Beveridge. Now you might be thinking, far out, that's pretty low. Let me get started with this. Now Bevo, 2016, arguably the greatest coaching performance I've ever seen, to get the Dogs, who were in 7th, I believe, lowest part of the 8, to get them all the way up to winning the flag. Some of the best games of football I've seen. The game style he created in that year was perfect for finals, hitting the ground and running, finding form at the right time. Coaching performance is brilliant. Getting through, teams like GWS and Sydney, who were bound to make the grand final the whole year. That was phenomenal, but since then, I've been disappointed. Constantly had one of the best lists in the competition, with some of the best players, up forward in the midfield, in the defensive line. But unfortunately for him, he's failed in my eyes since then. He did make the grand final in 2021, but people will forget all year they were top 2 and he lets it slip, getting to 5th place at the end of the home and away. They still make their grand final, but you could argue that's an opportunity lost. For me, Bevo's inconsistent. Okay, he's year on, the year after he's off. Year after he's on, off on, off on. The Dogs are in the 8, out the 8, in the 8, out the 8. Constantly confusing, and I think they've always had the list to make top 8, which is why I don't have him higher, but he has won the flag and made a grand final, and for that, he's an 8. In 7th, I've gone with a man who's coached at 2 clubs for the last 10 years. It's Ross Lyon. Yes, Ross Lyon, the St Kilda and Fremantle coach. Now, we're starting this from 2013. He made the grand final that year. Body of work, he's done a lot. He's made the grand final in this decade, in 2013. They played all right. I feel like they put up the best fight out of all 3 teams who played Hawthorn throughout 2013 and 15 in the grand finals. But I think what he had to deal with Fremantle after that was pretty hardcore. Complete drop in talent. All the old stars were moving on. Not much young talent. And Fremantle's just a hard job. Look, there's no history there, no success, so it's pretty hard for a coach to build something. But I think he did phenomenally well with the list there, nurturing the young talent. As a coach, at times, he can be, a little bit bad in terms of he falls out with players. I think he's in 7th because of body of work, coaching for all those years, has some time off, now goes to St Kilda this year, back to his first club where he coached, and he did great, finishing 6th home and away season with all those injuries. Really rate him as a coach. Tactically, he's above a lot of these coaches. Experience experience, and for me, for the last decade, it feels right to put him in 7th. In 6th place, I've gone with a man who hasn't won a flag, but he just was 1 kick away from it this year in Chris Fagan. Yes, 1 kick away from winning the flag this year, unfortunately. I think Fagan, if you think about what he had to deal with when he came to Brisbane, one of the worst teams in the competition, a team that had been failing for decades. After that three-peat, Brisbane were essentially bottom of the table year after year, irrelevant. Chris Fagan comes in around 2017, and he effectively has to transform that list. He has to get Brisbane from being a terrible team run by terrible coaches in the past to being good, and he did that. He got them from somehow being a team that got dominated by 100 points week after week, building year after year, building that list, building the culture, which is the thing he does great. And ultimately, we see Chris Fagan in 6th place because of what he did for the Brisbane Lions throughout that sort of 2018 to 2023 period. Actually, maybe it was 2019. Yeah, in 2019 is where he really started to kick things into gear for Brisbane. Obviously, they made the top 2, and look, they were unfortunate to go out straight sets that year. Straight sets in 2 different seasons isn't great for his resume, but making prelims twice, making a grand final, having to transform that list from the depths up to being good, that's why I put him in 6th place, okay? Body of work's there as well. You know, he'd been coached for 6-7 years now. But overall, I think the challenge he had to endure was greater than all the coaches I've said before. Now, before I get into my top 5, I'm gonna go through some honorable mentions and explain why I haven't put them in my top 10 coaches for the last decade. The main 2, Ken Hindley. I haven't put Ken Hindley in my top 10. Yes, he's made a couple prelims, but he fails at the big stage. 2 prelims now where he's lost at his home ground. In 2020, Richmond came to Adelaide to play Port Adelaide at the home ground. They won that prelim. The year after, the Dogs come back to Adelaide at Port Adelaide's home ground. That's 2 brilliant chances of making the grand final, and both years they lose. The Dogs dominated them that year as well in that prelim. And then this year they go out straight sets. So in terms of a coach, when it's time to win at that dying stage, the important time of the year, Ken Hindley has been proven to fail time after time, and that's why he's missed out. Now, body of work, he's brilliant. He's been coaching all for the last 10 years or so. He's one for me that was probably unlucky, but I feel like he's had plenty of opportunity to do something with that list. 2014 as well was a slept on year. People won't remember that, but he was brilliant for Port Adelaide. And they nearly did the great and won a flag that year somehow. But I just feel like he's always been close to being sacked. You know, year after year, there's talks of him being sacked. Inconsistent, a bit like Luke Beveridge. I feel like he's had the list to do something, but year after year, it's on, off, on, off. Top 8, bottom 8. Top 4, bottom fucking 8. Something like that. I don't know. Unlucky to miss out. A bit of an agenda as well. I don't think tactically he's a great coach. I think there's some fragility there. Also, an honourable mention is Simon Goodwin. Now, you might be crucifying me because he has won a flag, and the likes of Scott, Cameron, and Lyon and Fagan haven't won a flag. Footy is not all about winning flags. I'm not judging this purely based on accolades. I've done another video about this, about Melbourne's dire situation, currently speaking. Goodwin has failed that club. He got them that flag, which is brilliant. He built that list, built that club. Look, he didn't get those draft picks in, Petrarca, Oliver, Gorn, stuff like that. But now I have been so let down by this guy. He has his own personal issues with allegations of drug abuse. The team he's coaching now is completely fractured culturally. You know, the cultural problems are crazy bad, like really, really bad, and ripple effects will go through that club. Stephen May issues, Joel Smith issues, Clayton Oliver issues. Those are players that ultimately their wrongdoings come under Goodwin. Goodwin is control of the culture there, people's attitude, behavior, fixing them, making it good. And he has the list to win a dynasty, and he's failed year after year since that flag. Double straight sets now, not looking good, not good enough. I'm not convinced by him as a coach. I said it before, Melbourne need to get rid of him. And for me, for the last 10 years, yes, he's done great, but he is not in my top 10 coaches because he's had a list that he should have done better with. Try to go on a rant there, but for me, those two just don't make it. Now on to my 5th place, it's Adam Simpson. Simo, for me, winning that flag in 2018, breaking Richmond's drought. Oh, I guess Collingwood broke it. Buckley is another good honourable mention. Look, to win that flag in 2018, in between that dynasty for Richmond, I think was impressive. 2015, making the grand final, probably not should have won, but obviously people will forget that in 2015, the first final that year that West Coast played was against Hawthorn, the eventual grand final winners. They beat Hawthorn that first final. They take them up again in the grand final, a rematch, and Hawthorn get the better of them. So a pretty unfortunate event there. That was an opportunity that was missed. But since then, he's been a good coach. I think West Coast have always been up and about. I've said before that flag was very impressive. The years after that, he was unfortunate that Richmond and Geelong existed, but I love him as a coach. Body of work, he's been coaching for the last 10 years. He has been a phenomenal coach for West Coast. They've always been relevant. Things like even down to the fan base, how big they are, things down to the players they've brewed there. I think he's had a long-lasting effect on the culture at West Coast, and now things have gone tits up. People will forget the work he's done. May seem high, but body of work in his prime, that sort of coaching period, winning the greatest grand final I've ever seen, and ultimately his body of work. And I think tactically as a coach, he is as good as the coaches I've already mentioned, and even things down to he's an interstate club, having to win things when you're bound to go interstate to Victoria at the MCG for the grand final is always impressive. But he's won a flag, which is part of the reason I've put him high. Now, at fourth place, I've got brother of Brad, Chris Scott. Now, for me, this top four was absolutely conclusive. It's just the order you put these four coaches in. I'm not going to mention the other three yet, but for now, let's stick with Scott at 4. Chris Scott, phenomenal coaching. Tactically, I think as a culture, what he's done for Geelong, yes, he took over, a flag winning list. He still did win that flag in 2011. It's not part of the decade though, but he's won his flag this decade now as of last year. But just think about Geelong. They haven't made the finals twice for the last 10 years, which is crazy to think about. They were stuck at that hurdle of the prelims, Richmond defeating them in prelims, teams like Adelaide defeating them in prelims. They've had some troubles there, but in 2020, they made the grand final. This team beat them, unfortunately, Richmond, but they've always been up in the finals since 2013. Even as of 2013, and I think 2014, they were in around those prelims. Hawthorn obviously triumphing them. Kenneth Kersell's gone there. There's no doubt that Scott is one of the best coaches currently and for the last decade. Tactically, building a list in his prime, he's got the flag, he's kept them consistent. Keeping a team at the top for so long is one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing to do as a coach, because ultimately the higher you finish, the less draft picks you'll get, the less opportunity for talent, etc, etc, etc. He's done brilliantly well. This year he has, failed obviously, but for me it's his first full fail of a year. I think the culture he's created at Geelong, you never hear bad words about Geelong players, rarely, unlike Simon Goodwin. Building some of the best players we've ever seen. I think it's a clear number 4 for Chris Scott, but for me the other 3 coaches are better. And now let's go to third place now, John Longmire. That is right, I've got Horse in third place. Obviously he hasn't won a flag this decade. Unfortunately for him, it was the year before the decade started, okay, in 2012. So strictly speaking, I've got a man without a flag in third place. But let's look at the work he's done. 2014, he makes the grand final, unfortunately loses. 2015, I believe they made prelims maybe, didn't get there. 2016, they make the grand final, losing to the Dogs. 2017, they're up there again in the finals. 2018, and this is the key for me, he goes through a rebuild, and this man has perfected the rebuilds. How many times have we seen a team making a grand final and they enter a catastrophic, decade-long rebuild, riddled with complete failure of coaching staff, players, irrelevancy? Adelaide went through a torturous one recently. Carlton, Brisbane, Melbourne through decade-long rebuilds. Richmond as well you can put in that list. This man somehow got Sydney rebuilding on the go, 1 year off, and they're straight back to being good. The youth he's brewed, even to this day now, some brilliant young players, the academy. Look, ultimately they haven't done anything in the finals until last year where they made a grand final again. So that's 3 grand finals, but unfortunately, that's another grand final lost. So you might be thinking, why is it 3 over Chris Scott? The fact that he's rebuilt on the go is impressive. Making 3 grand finals is impressive. Body of work, let's keep it at that. Do I need to say much more? We all know John Longmire for the last 10 years has been the standout coach. Getting Sydney a relatively, not a relevant team, but not many people follow footy in New South Wales. Some of the big money moves, bringing Buddy Franklin there was a massive call. And I guess projecting in the future, it looks like Sydney have a great list. Yes, they didn't do much this year. I guess they made the 8, but I think he's a firm number 3. However, there is a gap between Longmire, Scott, and the top 2. Now, the top 2 is pretty obvious. Both men have 3 flags. Both have a dynasty this decade. Now, we're going to go to number 2 first. At number 2, I've got Damien Hardwick, coach of the lovely Richmond Football Club. Once upon a time, he fucking ditched us for the Gold Coast Suns. Oh, you need a break. 1 month, off to the Suns. Come on, Dimmer. Earn your bag. Respect to you. Now, Damien Hardwick is number 2, not number 1 for me. At number 1 is Alistair Clarkson. Well done, Alistair Clarkson. Now, let's compare the 2. First of all, both have won the 3 flags. Both have a dynasty. Hawthorn's arguably more impressive because it was 3 in a row. Richmond 3 in 4 years. For me, both of them had different trajectories in the last 10 years. Now, Damien Hardwick had to build a terrible, useless, irrelevant failure of a list. Decades of complete complete failure from Richmond. He had to build that into success, which is immensely impressive. Clarkson, similar, had to do that with Hawthorn, but that was way before 2013 started. If we look at 2013 to 2015, Richmond made the finals all throughout those years, never won one. 2013 to 2015, Clarko wins the three-peat, full stop. You keep moving on. 2016, Hawthorn feature in the finals. Unfortunately, don't do anything there really. You keep moving through. 17, they have a year up. In 2018, Hawthorn finished top 4, which was remarkable because they were pretty much a team that revolved around Tom Mitchell. They went out in straight sets in 2018, so nothing transpired from that. 2017, Richmond win the flag. 2018, Richmond make the prelims. Hawthorn finish top 4 but go out straight sets. And then obviously 2019 and 20, Richmond win the next 2 flags. Hawthorn go into a pretty big rebuild phase. Bringing Sam Mitchell as a sort of assistant coach was always bound to cause problems. And at the end of the day, Hawthorn got rid of him. Is that a taint on his legacy? Not enough for me to put him in second place. I think ultimately Clarko has been the king. He's been the coach of all coaches. Anyone who tries to argue Damien Hardwick finishes above him forgets that Damien Hardwick was brought to life as a coach by Alistair Clarkson. Yes, Dimmer was the assistant coach or coaching in the Hawthorn box throughout that sort of 2008 to 2010 period for Hawthorn. So if you try to argue that Damien Hardwick's a better coach, you can't, because Clarko literally made him. And that's coming from a Richmond fan. So bias aside, there's no way you can put Dimmer at 2. Clarko, tactically, technically speaking, body of work, Damien Hardwick's done more because he hasn't had a full year off for the last 10 years. But I think the thing with Dimmer is he won that three-peat, but before that and after that, they weren't doing too much. They've made finals, I believe, 7 out of the 10 years, 8 out of the 10 years, sorry. The years off were in 2016 and in 2021, and this year actually. So I guess we're doing a decade, but it's 11 years strictly speaking, but we're gonna ignore that. 3 years off the finals where Clarko, I mean, if you count his stint at North Melbourne, I'm pretty sure he's had maybe 4 or so, but let's be real, Clarko's the best coach. He's been the best coach for the last, when did 2008 start? In fact, when did 2006 start? What's it been? Nearly 20 years, okay? So he's been the best coach for a long time. At North Melbourne now, he's got a big challenge, both for himself with all the mental health problems he's had to overcome. He's back to coaching, but the challenge to get North Melbourne to relevancy, it's going to be interesting to see what he does. And Damien Hardwick now has a pretty similar, in fact, almost identical challenge in a sense that he's gone from a top club in Richmond, Clarko at Hawthorn, and he's gone to an irrelevant club who haven't had success ever or in years. North Melbourne, irrelevant, hopeless. Gold Coast, irrelevant, hopeless. Both coaches obviously have a massive job at hand. So in 5 years' time, this is going to be an interesting conversation about who's been a better coach out of those two. But both coaches are similar in a sense that they protect their players. They're so protective against the media, the press. They're obviously creating good cultures. Look, at the end of the day, they're the clear top 2 for me. The only 2 coaches currently, or for the last 10 years, who have won the dynasty. But all in all, that's my top 10 coaches. I'll go through it again. At 1, we have Alistair Clarkson. At 2, we have Damien Hardwick. At 3, we have John Longmire. At 4, we have Chris Scott. At 5, we have Adam Simpson. At 6, we have Chris Fagan. At 7, Russ Lyon. At 8, Luke Beveridge. At 9, Leon Cameron. And at 10, Brad Scott. Let me know if you agree. Best 10 coaches for the last decade, 2013 to 2023. In the comments, give me your list. Tell me where I've gone wrong. Follow the TikTok FTFooty. Make sure you like, subscribe. I'm doing these top 10 for the last decade. For forwards, defenders, midfielders, coaches, rucks, you name it, I'm doing it. And make sure you follow along for that because more videos are coming. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in another video.